Alright, welcome back to another one of these Pokemon Duel figure discussions, Pokemon Duel podcasts, whatever you like to call it. Today I have 3 figures, it's technically 2 in 1 plus another, that I want to talk about. And the first one is Gengar, of course the Mega. Now Gengar came out sort of early in the Mega era, pretty shortly after the first Megas, and was actually really strong when it first came out. Probably a lot of you remember, if you were playing at that time, you might remember the Tapu Koko and Mega Gengar opening play, which was pretty strong for the time, and was sort of the, I guess the beginning phases of rush decks. And as well as that, there was also the combination of it with Seismitoad that was pretty popular, and was kind of a somewhat meta deck at the time. Well, actually, I guess it was pretty meta, but maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more after we discuss the figure some. So Gengar itself is 2 MP, and it's a Ghost and Poison type, with the ability Night Stalker. This Pokemon can pass through other Pokemon when it MP moves. If it passes through poisoned, nauseous, or sleeping Pokemon, they will faint. And this is why it was paired with Seismitoad, because Seismitoad, when it battles, automatically poisons the opponent. And this is actually a really good ability. Being able to just instantly KO something as long as they have this status is really, really strong. And I already have the board up here, and I want to show you that something that Gengar can do is actually bypass getting surrounded in this situation as well. If Gengar is here, and this figure here is poisoned, nauseous, or sleeping, if you move over it, you're not surrounded because you technically KO this figure immediately. So you can jump over it, KO it, and now you have this positional advantage without getting surrounded in this situation. So it's actually a really good ability, and even just being able to move through figures in general is strong as it is. And we'll talk about this a bit more in terms of how effective it is to pull that off, but first let's talk about the wheel some. So it's not that impressive. 100 damage Nightshade is, it's not good enough, unfortunately. It was fine when it first came out, but only hitting 100 really holds this figure back in terms of how it can stand in sort of the later metas of the game. However, Contagious Terror, on the other hand, is actually a really interesting move and fairly strong, depending on the situation that it comes up in. So, a lot of moves that give weight typically are only weight 1 or sometimes weight 2, but Contagious Terror gives weight 3, which is actually really nice because it means no matter which turn you land Contagious Terror on, your opponent is guaranteed to have to wait 1 turn. Now it's only ever 1 turn. If you land Contagious Terror on your turn, it's 2 on your opponent's, 1 on yours, and then 0 when it goes back to them again. And then the other way around, if you land Contagious Terror on their turn, it's 2 on yours, 1 on theirs, and then 0 on yours, so when it comes back to them again, they only had to wait for 1 turn technically. But either way, that's really strong because it guarantees that that figure is unusable for that 1 turn at least. And it can actually affect multiple figures. And this is something that would come up sort of later in the game if your opponent is playing defensively and they're trying to protect their goal. You might have several figures piled up around the goal like this, and if Gengar lands Contagious Terror here, all 3 of these gain weight 3, and your opponent is going to be forced to play a plate. If you have their entry points blocked, they're going to be forced to play some kind of plate or if there's an ability they can activate somewhere, I don't know. But if they don't have something like that, then they're just guaranteed to get a weight loss here. Even though they already have 3 figures piled up, Gengar can sometimes be a win condition in this situation. Now, going back to the damage, like I said, 100 is not good enough. Now you do actually deal with Celebi, thankfully. If I recall, it blocks 120 or higher. So you can KO a Celebi, which is nice. But for everything else, 100 is just not good enough. Now, it is a ghost type at least, which means that you can use Gengar with Marshadow. And so Marshadow will technically allow Gengar to do an extra 20 damage, meaning that if it's chain 10, Gengar can do 130, which is okay, it's okay, but 130 was sort of the benchmark back in Deoxys attack days, and obviously it grew past that, so even though you can boost it to 130, it's still not enough. At least not to deal with a lot of meta figures. And the other issue is that Aegislash is everywhere. Now, a lot of figures lose to Aegislash, but you know, even with Marshadow, Gengar can't even KO an Aegislash Blade form up close. So it really struggles against that figure. As well as that, it's just genuinely not threatening to your opponent. It can move through figures, yes, and if you happen to pull off this poison, nauseous, or sleeping thing, that's really good, but your opponent generally isn't afraid of this figure while it's on the board, because it doesn't do much on its own. It needs setup, it needs the right kind of situation, and outside of that, Gengar, like I said, it doesn't pose much threat unless those specific situations are in play. However, when we take a look at Mega Gengar, things start to change a lot here. So immediately it becomes 3 MP, which is really strong for a figure that can move through other figures. Obviously runners are some of the most important figures in the game. You don't have to have a runner in your deck, of course, but just having 3 MP, being able to move through figures, that sort of quote-unquote Shuppet kind of figure, is really good. And it's actually a really strong Shuppet figure as well. So let's look at the ability first. Otherworldly Talents. This Pokemon can MP move through other Pokemon on the field, fairly standard. Pokemon next to this Pokemon cannot move using the effects of attacks, abilities, or energy. And opposing Pokemon next to this Pokemon cannot make MP moves. And then of course the standard Mega, Ghost, and Poison types deal +10. Now, this is really good. This is actually really good. Pokemon next to this Pokemon cannot move using attacks, abilities, or energy, nor can they MP move. Which basically means, no matter what, if an opposing figure is next to Mega Gengar, this figure can't go anywhere until Mega Gengar either ends its Mega or it gets KO'd and it's off the field. This figure here is permanently stuck while Mega Gengar is there. And I suppose I can talk about it now. This is where sort of using Mega Gengar in rush decks would come up. Because if your opponent is in the early game and they're in this situation here where you bring out Gengar and they have a figure on this side, if you Mega and move here, this figure now has to goal block. Because Mega Gengar is threatening the goal, this figure can't move at all, and unless they have like a Dio speed, they can't move 4 spaces onto the goal on this side. So this trap right here is really strong and was sort of the sort of the main strategy with Koko Gengar. Let me see if I remember correctly. So really, you would lead with Koko. It would bring something here. You can just move Koko up to the entry point. They have to cover the goal. Gengar comes out, and now you can take the other entry point as well. And this is something that you would do a lot. And really, you would just get both entry points really early on, because you had Tapu Koko, which moved through a lot of things. There weren't a whole lot of fairy types when Koko first came out, so you couldn't block it as easily. And then Mega Gengar was just a really strong 3MP figure that would take this entry point, and anything next to it is unable to move. So they would be forced to bring something else out on this side. Whoops. They would be forced to have something else out on this side, and then Gengar would be able to lock this figure. This one would be on the goal. But that's the idea, because now this figure... Hold on, let me get it in the right situation here. Alright, so this figure here can't move, because no matter which figure it goes to attack, the other one is able to take the goal. So this figure right here, its only option is to attack Mega Gengar in this situation. Which means, you have to go through a figure. I know we haven't talked about the wheel yet, but you have to go through a figure that hits 140 at base, 150 at chain 10, and it's pretty hard, especially back in those days. Nothing would hit that amount of damage without an X attack. So for the time, this was really strong, and even later, Rush decks still like to use Mega Gengar for this effect, just being able to lock figures around this entry point so that they can only attack Mega Gengar. And of course, pre-nerfed Zoroark would be able to swap with Mega Gengar, so you could put it on the other entry point or lock down something else somewhere else. But because Zoroark got nerfed, that situation wasn't available after that, of course. So now let's talk about the wheel, because this is where it gets even more interesting. So it has Toxic. The battle opponent becomes nauseous, and this of course will become a 2-star purple when you're Mega Evolved. So that's pretty good, it means they do -40, which means now your other Gengar, if you're using multiple, will have an easier time KOing things in battle, and also it can move over that nauseous figure to immediately KO it. It has a bit of dodge, and it has Abyssal Grip. If this Pokemon faints, the battle opponent moves to your PC. And this is where Mega Gengar sort of becomes a good attacker in that sense. Now, it can't attack everything. There's still things like Moongeist Beam, Take Away, Arceus with its Judgment, 4D Drive, where Abyssal Grip isn't going to do anything for you. But there are some figures where Abyssal Grip is actually really good. Now, I don't know if it works on a lot of things, but sort of the main figure that comes to my mind is Mega Garchomp. So if your opponent has a Mega Garchomp, Mega Gengar is actually a pretty good pick to attack into it. So one, because of its ability, Mega Garchomp can't jump over you using its ability when you attack it. And two, Abyssal Grip will pull this Garchomp to your PC if Gengar gets KO'd. So either you land Dodge or Toxic, and if you land Toxic, that's really good. Or maybe they land Draco Meteor, which would be really bad for you. But other than that, Abyssal Grip against either of Garchomp's white moves will cause Gengar to get KO'd, and this Garchomp is now in your PC. And if we look at this in terms of figure advantage, at face value, it's even. If there are no figures in your PC, well, actually no, at face value it's +1. So, or is it? No, sorry. If there are no figures in your PC, it's even, because you lose a figure on the field and your opponent loses a figure on the field. If there's anything in your PC, it's getting cycled out. So if there's one figure, you get that one back. If there's two figures, you get those two back. But at the same time, your opponent isn't cycling their PC because this Garchomp is now in yours. So depending on how the PCs are set up, you can be up in terms of the number of figures you have available now. Let's say, oh, sorry about that. Let's say that your opponent had two figures in the PC and you had two figures in the PC. When you land Abyssal Grip and it works, you get two figures back, your opponent gets none back, and both of these figures are off the field now. So really, if I can think about this correctly, it's +2, -1, +1. Yeah, I believe it's +2 in terms of advantage if there's two figures in both PCs. And now you're ahead on the number of figures because they now only have 3 figures to play with while you have 5. That's just thinking in terms of advantage at least. So all in all, Mecha Gengar is actually a really strong figure, and if you're running multiple Gengars, having a Mega plus Marshadow means that a Chain 10 Gengar hits 150, which is still not quite enough, unfortunately. It still works out to where Gengar itself doesn't do enough damage, but you know, if you can land that Nauseous with Mecha Gengar, or even if you pull off a Poison Z move, Gengar becomes a little more threatening then. Now, in terms of figures that pair with Gengar, unfortunately there aren't a lot of really strong figures that apply Poison or Nauseous or Sleep, at least in the late game meta. So it's a little bit hard to utilize Gengar's second part of its ability, which is a shame really. If there were better figures that could apply these statuses, I think Gengar would have seen a lot more play. But as it is, it really can only come up if you're only using, well, I suppose you can only use one Gengar. You know, maybe it's just like a tech figure in a deck where you have an Aganadel, or maybe you're running a sleep deck if you like that. But otherwise, I think sort of the main option would just be to pull off an Acid Downpour, which can potentially poison a lot of figures, but can also potentially just poison nothing. So, you know, it's a little hard to utilize this ability, which, like I said, is kind of a shame because it's actually really strong if you can pull it off consistently. But as it is, it's too difficult, in my opinion, to really do that. Now, the other figure I wanted to discuss a little bit, probably a little less than Gengar, is Cresselia. Now, unlike Gengar, when Cresselia came out, you know, I would see it sometimes, but not really very often. So it's a Psychic type 2 MP and has the ability Crescent Veil. If this Pokemon is on the field and is not affected by a special condition, Moonblast from any of your Pokemon deals plus 50 damage, and it does not stack. Now, the places that the decks that I would see Cresselia in were, I would see people use it in a Gardevoir deck. And it's just because Gardevoir happens to have Moonblast, and Cresselia could fit in well enough with it. As well as Tapu Lele has Moonblast. I know the UX Umbreon has Moonblast, and a few other things I think, but it's mostly Gardevoir that's a relevant figure that has Moonblast, and Lele of course. But in my opinion, this ability is, it's okay, but because it's really only applicable to those figures, and to itself of course. In terms of the ability, Cresselia is not very flexible, but it's the wheel that interests me a little bit more. So it has Moonblast, and as long as its ability is active, it actually hits 160, which is really nice. So if you have it at chain 10, you're hitting 170. So it's actually pretty strong. And it happens to have Ice Beam as well, which Freeze is one of the best statuses in the game. I suppose technically the best. So if you do land Ice Beam and you freeze something, that's actually really nice. But Lunar Dance is kind of the main draw of this figure for me. So let's read what it does. Removes the Asleep condition from your Pokemon and moves all of your Pokemon that are in a PC to the bench. Then this Pokemon moves to your PC. And although I never used Cresselia, I think this attack is actually pretty strong if you think about it in the context of, well, I guess it depends on how good you think Ho-Oh is. Because Ho-Oh does something similar. When Ho-Oh is KO'd, it moves all of your figures that are in your PC to your bench. It also brings back any of your excluded fire types and fire types in the Ultra Space. But Cresselia does something similar, but it's on a move instead of it getting KO'd. So sometimes it might be easier or harder to pull this off, but it moves figures in both PCs to your bench as well. So in terms of advantage, I think Cresselia is actually a pretty good option. Now, maybe you can also kind of compare it to Mega Ampharos. Ampharos is way better, but it's something else you can kind of think about. Maybe it has sort of a similar use to, where you're bringing advantage. Ampharos gives you board advantage, or I should say positional advantage as well, because you bring the figures onto the board. But there are few figures that move figures in your opponent's PC back to you, and Cresselia is one of those few figures that can do that. So if you're up against anything with Mighty Sphere, or if you're up against EX Steelix with its takeaway, or even Drifloon and Drifblim, Lunar Dance from Cresselia can actually be really nice. And the thing is, I want to say it's a bit better than Ho-Oh as well, because Ho-Oh is just not very strong. Rainbow Wing is not optional, and it only hits 130 on its highest damage. Cresselia, on the other hand, hits 160. It has a chance to freeze, and it has Shattered Psyche. So if you're the type of player that, if you're using a deck that has figures that you want to cycle repeatedly, you just want to be able to have them available all the time. You want to play the game in terms of having figure advantage over your opponent. I think Cresselia is actually a pretty decent option for that. Now, I don't think you can really build, well, you can build sort of a theme deck around Cresselia with Moonblast or something, but I think at least in the way I'm thinking of it currently. I think Cresselia would be good just in a deck that has just really strong staple figures. You know, your Dawnwings, your Palkia, maybe an Arceus or a Celebi, just things that are really strong and hard for your opponent to deal with, and you want to continuously cycle them. So I think Cresselia is a pretty good figure to just kind of keep in the back and maybe push it up, go for a Z move or land Lunar Dance to get some figures back when you need them. That was really all I wanted to say about it, just that I think it's an interesting figure conceptually, if you're looking at it in terms of how it can affect the advantage of the game. And for that reason, looking at it that way, I think it's a bit better than Ho-Oh in that sense. But that was it. Not sure how well this episode went, but it was okay, I suppose. Didn't have any notes for this one, but that's all for this one, and hopefully I'll make another one soon.